Iowa City Foreign Relations Council hosts community programs to address topics of international interest. We thank our members, volunteers, and interns for making these forums possible since the first Hooters opened in Clearwater, Florida in 1983. Okay. I want to acknowledge our university and community supporters. The University of Iowa's international programs, the University of Iowa's honors program, the University of Iowa Center for Public Policy, and the Stanley U of I Foundation Support Organization for their financial support. And I also thank today's special financial sponsors, Jim and Pat and Epgrave and Taxes Plus. I also thank City Channel 4 for professionally recording our programs for cablecast on City Channel 4 or 118-2 and the U of I Library's digital archives. Please be sure to like City Channel 4 on Facebook. At this point, then, it is my pleasure to introduce Steve Schulz. Steve Schulz is the Senior Director for the Global Talent Acquisition and Mobility Organization for Rockwell-Collins in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Steve's responsibilities include all recruiting efforts across the globe, foreign national employee strategy, contract labor, mobility, relocation, short and long-term assignments, K-12 STEM efforts, and external diversity partnerships. Steve has worked in the talent acquisition profession for more than 2 decades. Founded in 1933, Rockwell-Collins is recognized worldwide as the industry leader in advanced avionics for commercial and military aircraft and is one of Iowa's largest employers. Please welcome Steve Schulz as he speaks to us today on travel bans, uncertainties, and real-world consequences.
Thanks, Janet. And I'm thrilled to be here, first of all, so thank you for having me. Second thing, just a disclaimer, I've got this hacking cough that's going on about 4 weeks. The more I talk, the more I cough, so I've got water underneath, but if I go into a fit, my apologies up front. So a little bit about myself. So I'm originally from the Detroit, Michigan area. Grew up there. I've been in Iowa for about 9 years, working for Rockwell that entire time. And I just want to say I am a avid Michigan State hater. So last Saturday, I watched with keen interest the game and was really pulling for the Hawkeyes. Unfortunately, that didn't go as any of us would have liked. So Janet talked about what is Rockwell-Collins, what are our responsibilities, and I'm just going to go and talk about that in a little bit more detail. Okay, so with regards to Rockwell-Collins, very, very proud of Rockwell-Collins in our industry, recognized as one of the premier aerospace and defense organizations. And so when you take a look at what we do, it's predominantly our historical products, our avionics, communication, electronics. And so those are our products. If you go into a plane, in the cockpit as you look to the left, we're a leader there and we have been for a long time. With a recent acquisition that we made, BE Aerospace, we're now in the interiors business, so then you go and look to the right as you get on the plane, in the galley, in the cabin, and we make a lot of that stuff too. Sandwiched in between, Rockwell-Collins, when you go and you fly, we're in the information management services business as well. And so what that may mean, you may touch our product and never know it. So when you go into it to an airport, you check in a kiosk, most of that system, that network is our product. When you go and you're at a connecting flight, and it seems like if you fly out of Cedar Rapids or the Quad Cities, you usually have a connection, and you're looking to see the arrival departure board. What gate am I at? Is the flight on time? That network, that system, that's also our product. So a lot of great things that Rockwell-Collins makes. So turning to our organization, so Global Talent Acquisition and Mobility. What is it that our team does? So you can think of it very simply, and we are a 30,000 employee global company, Rockwell-Collins is, operating in over 150 countries and territories. And so the business, based on those products I talked about, you've got things that are happening all across the globe relative to where our products are made, designed, manufactured, shipped, where are our customers, where do we service product. It's all over the place. And so our team's responsibility is pretty simple and I can summarize it in the business needs talent. And so we go and we try to determine what type of talent do you need. Is it technicians? Is it finance folks? Is it engineers? So what type? And then where do you need them in the globe? When and about how many? And so you go and you ask those questions, and that results in literally thousands of transactions every single year. So that can be, we can go and answer the business's needs via contract employees, temporary workers, partnerships with joint ventures. We may make permanent hires. We may have individuals that we're moving to another location on a short-term assignment, a permanent relocation, a 2-year job. There's all sorts of different scenarios and ways that the business goes and gets their needs met. So global mobility is the other part of our organization. And so that's really the part where you take a look to say, okay, if we've got somebody in Richardson, Texas, and we need to move them to Sterling, Virginia, pretty straightforward and simple. Some things that we have to do, but from a complexity perspective, not very complex. But then if you start to go and say, okay, we're going to move somebody from Singapore to Brazil, or we're going to take somebody from Australia and move them over to Mexicali. Very, very complex and challenging. Why? Because from a work authorizations, rules, the permits, the things that you need to do, they're different for every single country. Within a country, you might have different rules. And then what happens is those rules are ever changing. So a part of our organization is focused on, and this is going to absolutely dovetail into the broader conversation later, dealing with all of that complexity is really important, because the last thing in the world you want is to go and have individuals that you're sending over to parts of the globe, and they get to the border and they're turned back and sent back home because they don't have the right type of work permit or authorization. Or we send somebody over for 2 weeks and that becomes 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months, and all of a sudden, unbeknownst to us, we've broken some local rule. And so then the company and that individual potentially are in trouble. And so there's a lot of complexity to manage. I think the next thing that's really important to talk about is why is global such a huge focus for us today? So I started with Rockwell-Collins in November of 2008. And I remember very clearly when I first started with the organization, I've got responsibility across the entire globe, but the majority of our positions, and we'd have anywhere from 300, 800 positions open at any given time, but only a dozen or so that were outside of the US. And so we were, if you take a look at big corporate America and classic corporate America, at least those companies that are headquartered in the United States, we kind of followed that classic footprint, which is obviously very mature business in the United States, the same thing in Europe, but outside of that, pretty immature relative to our global fluency and knowledge. Not to say we didn't do business there, but how do we operate there effectively? There's been a learning curve over the course of the last decade that I think a lot of Fortune 500 US-based companies are on. But it's at the same time, the footprint, if you take a look at, and our CEO Kelly Ortberg has talked about this, at the same time, where is the global growth? And it's not just in the aerospace or aviation business, but really, I was, prior to coming to Rockwell, in a consumer packaged goods organization. So our primary products were health, nutritional supplements and beauty products. And the largest markets were outside of the US. You may have heard the term BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China. Those are huge growth markets. Well, the same thing holds true in the aerospace and aviation industry. And so while in the US and in Europe, there is growth in the industry, but not explosive growth. That explosive growth is happening outside the United States. So it's really a game changer for us relative to how do you then go and operate and approach the global business opportunity. And we really had to think differently. So I talked about in 2008, we may have had a dozen positions. Our senior executive leadership didn't spend a lot of time and energy worrying about 10, 12 positions when we had 600 in Cedar Rapids that we were trying to fill. Well, you fast forward to today, and that has changed dramatically. So as our business has shifted globally, now a third of our volume, so you're talking about dozens and dozens, hundreds of jobs that are outside of the US. And so in the Philippines, as an example, when we're trying to fill 100 jobs and it's taking too long, it costs us too much money, and we're just not very effective at finding the right talent, then does that attract attention from our senior executive leadership? You better believe it. So I get phone calls, and there's a lot of pressure to ensure that globally we're delivering for the business in a very effective way. So in the past, our business, if you took a look at what percent was global, it was a smaller percentage. Since I've been with Rockwell, we've grown where just under half of our business now is global, so the revenue is driven outside of the US. Many of you have heard, and I've already had some brief conversations about United Technologies, so that's interesting, exciting news for the company. But they're even more global than we are, as was BE Aerospace, a company that we acquired less than a year ago. And so you take and you look at those organizations, all of a sudden what happens is our mix is going to be even more global, more of our business, more of our jobs outside of the US than inside. So what does that mean for individuals like me? So my responsibility is, as I said, the business needs people, and I've got to ensure that they've got the resources that they need. And so it really forces you to take a different mindset and approach relative to how are you meeting that need. You've got to be more strategic. When you think about a term that we use in HR all the time is workforce planning, which is taking a look at the workforce and the people needs of the business over a span of 3 to 5, 10 years. And so where are you acquiring talent from? Why? What talent exists where in different regions of the globe? You've got to answer all of those questions. So one of the things that's great is at the same time as this industry shift, and it's kind of chicken and the egg, so at the same time, big data, which you see so predominantly used in things like consumer marketing, now HR professionals are beginning to use those tools, and I'll show you what that kind of looks like. Okay, so here, there's an organization, it's called Corporate Executive Board, that we partner with, and they're fantastic with regards to the tools they have, the data that they produce, a lot of the strategic partnership, so they can go and talk about best practices. And so this chart here is pretty interesting. And basically what it tells us is if you take a look, science, technology, engineering, math, that is the biggest bulk of what Rockwell recruits for. So if we go on average and fill 4,000, 5,000 positions a year, roughly half of those jobs are engineers. So very, very critical to our hiring needs. It's the backbone of our business. And what this tells us is that at the same time, demand is increasing, the supply of STEM talent is not keeping pace. And so you take a look in the not too distant future, and there is a huge disparity and gap. Hundreds of thousands of jobs, we're just not going to have the talent in the US to meet those needs. So it's a pretty scary challenge for individuals with my job. So what are we going to do about that? Now, what's interesting about this chart is a lot of individuals will look at this and say, it looks like that shortfall has happened since 13, 14, but we haven't really experienced the pain. Why don't I read more about this? Why aren't people running around and more alarmed? And I'll tell you the reason why is the economic recession of 2008-9 was it masked the problem. So businesses were concerned about just trying to get themselves back on track. Hiring was not the main focus for organizations. And so we got a bit of a reprieve from this war for talent, which was good, but guess what? That's over. And in fact, when large company executives were surveyed, what they said is the challenge in filling jobs is tougher than pre-recession levels. So this is a very real problem. We feel it, and it has a lot of consequences for us relative to cost, timeliness of being able to deliver to the business. This is the type of stuff that keeps us up at night. Okay, so the other thing is software engineers is one of the critical jobs that Rockwell-Collins recruits for. And so up here you've got some of the logos of some of the companies in our industry. Some of them are customers, some are competitors. And so in the past, when we're going and recruiting talent, and we recruit globally, we certainly recruit from coast to coast, north, south, east, west. These are the companies that we're going to go and we're going to have booths at career fairs, that we're competing for the same grads, professionals, and so that just makes sense. But what's happened is there's a convergence of skills and jobs. So jobs are starting to converge as are transferable skills. So this is what's happened. All of a sudden, those companies and that footprint of what you were competing for starts to look very different. So in the past, I had to worry about Garmin and Northrop Grumman and Lockheed because we're going head to head. Well, now when we're out at campuses, these are the types of organizations that are going after the same type of software engineers that we are. So there's this real squeeze for organizations on trying to get the best, brightest, diverse talent across the country, and we're all competing again for the same people. So it has really changed the game quite a bit. We know this is true because as we not only are getting, competing with organizations with offers, and we'll talk to a candidate and they'll say, I got a offer I'm mulling from Apple and General Motors too, and we try to talk them into coming to Rockwell, and sometimes we win and sometimes we lose, but we're also seeing some of our employees that are leaving as well. So organizations are even coming and recruiting at Rockwell. So what do we do about this? We get back to the big data. What the big data tells us is how much, where is it? And this is an interesting chart. So Oxford Economics compiled a lot of data from a lot of different sources, produced a great report. You can go and Google it in 2016. And so what it shows is, and I'm going to show you 3 different charts, very interesting information relative to STEM talent, again, that we're concerned about, supply and demand, and where is it? And so what it shows you in the green, and you can think about this just like if you were about to approach a traffic light, green, you're good. Yellow, you should probably slow down or be concerned, and red, you're going to get a ticket. And so if you look at what's interesting, what catches my eye is that when we talked about that classic U.S. footprint from a maturity perspective is the United States and Europe, you can see that those are the areas that are going to experience the biggest talent disparity. So who's healthier up here? Certainly India. Yeah. And why? Because they're producing tens of thousands of STEM grads, and not just STEM grads, really good STEM grads. And so India, this is a game changer, because all of a sudden what happens is you say, well, we used to bring everybody to Cedar Rapids and hire them here, and we used to hire them and focus our efforts on trying to recruit in California and Texas and in the East Coast and Florida. Well, now you've got to expand to say you can still bring the talent to the United States, maybe, but where you're going to look becomes very, very different. And if we ignore this, before too long, I'm out of a job. It's just the truth. Okay, how are we doing on time? So this next chart is a little bit different, and so I'm at the University of Iowa. This talks about why do we have some of the problems on the earlier chart. What it goes and shows is, and look at the percentages here. Look at the US and Europe. And then again, look at India and Brazil. The number of graduates that are getting pumped out by these countries, there's this huge disparity and gap. And for this chart, they don't have nearly as the breadth of countries as on the earlier chart, but it still illustrates the point. This is one of the reasons that that earlier chart is true. It's fact. And we've got the numbers. We can go and look. There's tools, Talent Neuron, MZ are 2 that we've purchased in the past that show us literally, here's the number of individuals that are enrolled in these types of degree programs at every major university and school across the world. And we can see, here's where a bunch of them are and here's where a bunch of them are not. So finally, the last look at it, this is another one that just illustrates kind of the same point, is what about the global overlay? So when you take a look at it and it's overlaid across the globe, what does it look like? And so the red is where you have talent disparity, and then green, yellow, where there's more opportunity from a talent perspective. Okay, so what are the ramifications then for individuals like myself? What has to change? And what does it all mean? Number one, it's something that when I'm about to go out to New York City. I was in Philly this summer earlier. You go and you talk to some of the heads of recruiting at some of these other great organizations. And the good thing is we're kind of all in this together. We're all facing the same problem at the exact same time. And we all have said, you've really got to expand outside of the U.S. One of the things that's a really important metric for heads of recruiting is how long does it take us to fill jobs? And so if all of the things that we said were true, certainly you'd see a shift relative to some of our performance metrics. So time, cost, quality, diversity are 4 of the classic measures. Now there's a bunch of micro measures under each of those categories that we use to measure the recruiting function. But time, what's happened for STEM jobs is over the last 4 years, you've seen a 5-day increase in the time it takes to fill jobs, a 5-day increase every single year over the last 4 years. So about a 35 to 40% increase in time it's taking U.S. companies to fill jobs. So that's, and specifically STEM jobs. It's a pretty scary key performance indicator that, again, there's a problem that we've got to solve. So what has Rockwell-Collins done? There's a lot of stuff, so strategies, tactics that I could go into. What we're going to focus on more so is something that I think has been a real benefit to the organization. And I've also got responsibility for it. And it's employing our foreign national employees and population. And so what are some of the visas that we more prominently go and leverage TN? So North America, if you go and you look at Canada, Mexico, the H-1B, very, very popular in the F visas. We hire globally. I think we had about 630 interns last year across the globe. So we work with F visas quite a bit as well. The annual visa cap, as I think many of you know, the government the Department of Labor, and institutes a cap on visas every single year. They really focus, and the conversation really focuses on the H-1 visas. And so in those visas, they put a cap on the number that U.S. companies can go and apply for every single year. The cap, even though it sounds big, so roughly 65,000, 20,000 for individuals with master's degrees, it's woefully insufficient. So literally what this process looks like is there's a lottery. So companies go, and that we work with a law firm, Fragaman, out of Troy, Michigan. So they're great in this space. We fill out applications for individuals to bring them here, and literally within 5 days, the cap has been reached, and they go and they say, companies, we're out, we're done. They hold a lottery to select which individuals literally get selected to go and that they go and extend these visas to. So I've personally gone on record. One of our senior executives, that his responsibility's got a small office in Washington that's set up to go and lobby on Rockwell's behalf. He's also, with our instruction, gone and told those individuals that are a part of that decision-making process, Rockwell's stance is it's not enough. I mean, it's clearly not enough. So we would love to see that cap get increased, and we're going to talk a little bit more about in a little bit about why some of the challenges and concerns I think socially our current administration has with companies making that request. So as far as Rockwell-Collins goes, if you go and you look at what we did when I first came to Rockwell back in 2008, is we've always employed a lot of foreign national employees. Our stance, one of the big things that culturally we recognize, it's been validated by some consulting firms that we've worked with, is especially in locations, and it's a general statement. It doesn't hold true to every single individual, but a lot of individuals from India, as an example, many individuals that come to work on a visa would love to get permanent residency and get their green card, and that enables them a lot more rights and privileges. And so, but that's a really expensive, time-consuming process. And so what we did, Rockwell's stance was, you can have a 3-year term for an H-1 visa. When you're coming close to that 3-year term limit, you can go and apply for a single extension. And the extension's also 3 years. So in essence, you've got 6 years. And if nothing else happens at the end of the 6 years, those individuals have to go back to their home country. And so what Rockwell did is in year number 5, so we would go in, if we brought somebody in on a brand new H-1 visa, then what would happen is we would wait until year number 5, and we would go and say, well, they've been a good employee to us. We're now going to go and apply for their permanent residency application. We're going to assist with that process. We're going to take on the expense. That's a pretty long wait. Not only is that a long wait, and as many of you I'm sure know, for certain locations, the backlog, again, the Department of Labor and how they're going and processing those applications, for India, if you go today and look at the date of the applications, they're still working on applications from the mid-2000s. So there is a huge backlog. So even when you go and submit the application for permanent residency, there's a huge wait. And so it can be years and years and years. Now the good news is as soon as you file for permanent residency, then that H-1B extension, it kind of rolls on indefinitely through the process. So even if you hit that 6-month mark, you're still okay. So Rockwell-Collins, to give you some context, we've got about 30,000 employees. We have roughly 500 foreign national employees, 500. So relative to our overall employee population, it's not an enormous percentage. At the same time, 500 is a very significant number. It really helps. These are fantastic engineers. So one of the things with those individuals is there are some limitations relative to the programs due to import and export rules and restrictions that they can work on. But we've realized, again, if you go and look at that global talent, we've got to do everything we can to go and get that great talent to address the shortfall. And I don't know that our prior program and rules were necessarily doing a lot in the way of driving employee engagement. That's really important to us at Rockwell. So if you take a look at this quote, it's by a senior executive from Medtronic, and I'll let you read it. So Rockwell-Collins cares very much about engagement. What is engagement? It's basically how does an individual feel about the company that they're working for? How energized are they? How positive? What type of discretionary effort will they put in? If you're able to coast and loaf along and get the job done, and individuals do that, they're probably not really very engaged. If they're highly engaged, then they're going to go above and beyond on a consistent basis to perform and ensure that the business is getting what they need and then some. So engagement's really, really important. Well, if you go back to our old program, it wasn't fantastic in the way of engagement. And so in 2012, we set about going and having conversations with our foreign national employees and asking them, how did the rules, our program, work for them? And they were very honest. And they said, frankly, it's like, well, if you take a look at other organizations that are global companies that are bringing this global talent in, They're not waiting 5 years. And so we did some benchmarking outside of Rockwell. We listened to our employees, and we made some big changes because we wanted to have our words and our actions match, which is very important, and yet we're going to make you wait 5 years. That was incongruent. So what we wanted to do was have a practice that was consistent with what we were saying. And so through that process, we made a lot of changes that were dramatic. So as opposed to the 5 years, we cut it way, way down. So when I say way down, basically now what happens is an individual has to complete a single performance cycle. So within a 2-year span, an individual can come to Rockwell, and provided that they're performing at a satisfactory level, and it's completely voluntary. I mean, what happens is we get a flag that gets triggered for all of our foreign national employees, and it tells us when they're approaching that mark, and we reach out to them and their leader, and we ask them flat out, are you interested in, we'll take on the expense, and if they say no, that's fine. The majority of them do say yes, and we begin that process. And so through that change, the lift that it's provided, number one, our employees that are here are a lot happier, more engaged. They feel like the valuable employees that they are. At the same time, when we're out and hiring, this word spreads pretty quickly. And so the individuals that are candidates out in the marketplace also know that Rockwell-Collins is much more open to and invested in our foreign national employees. And so we see a lot more traction relative to our outreach and them acknowledging that outreach, which is fantastic. So all that's great, and we're humming along, and we're really, really happy with the results that we're seeing. Yeah, I can hear the chuckles and the laughter. But so along comes some change in administration and a lot of uncertainty. And oh boy, is it causing a lot of consternation. And so there's a lot of myth, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of questions, and we're dealing with a lot of the real ramifications of what that means. And then also some of the conjecture or speculation. So I'll address some of the things. So with regards to travel bans, is this real? Well, the rules change, and you all read the newspaper just like I do. We get guidance from our external legal counsel, and they keep us abreast of different changes, and they're different all over the place. So this type of citizen with this work authorization or visa coming here versus this country, it's different, and it's a lot to keep your hands on. Well, a few weeks ago, what happened to us? So we've got a facility in India. It's called our India Design Center. A fantastic group of engineers, hundreds of engineers that are there, and we go and parse off important pieces of work to that facility and to the wonderful people there. There is a back and forth relative to some of our leaders, our engineers going to the India Design Center, as well as hosting on a 6-month rotating basis a number of those employees, so that they can meet the individuals and teams that they're working on and supporting, meet leadership, get hands-on different types of product. It's fantastic relative to the productivity and the engagement that builds. And it's never been a problem. And we'll bring individuals and we put them in corporate temporary housing over a 6-month period. And literally we're talking about a couple dozen engineers at a time. They rotate and go back with all of the things that they've experienced and learned, and a new group comes in. And so it's expensive, but very, very, the productivity and the engagement far outweigh the cost. Well, what happened recently was, and it's the first time literally in the 9 years I've been responsible for this, where we had individuals detained at O'Hare and for I think it was 5-6 hours. One individual that they allowed to proceed, and then one that they sent back. And so then think about what happens is that individual, horrible experience for both of them, number one. Second, the individual that was sent back, so denied entry. There's nothing we could do. Kelly Ortberg could have gotten on the phone with whomever it was that was at O'Hare, wasn't gonna make a difference. They got denied entry, so they had to go back, and then that individual, traumatized to a degree, but once they go back to work, they're going to go and talk to all of their colleagues and say, yeah, it's a mess. Like I had all of this paperwork and we've done what we always do and I couldn't get in there. And so all of the leaders at our IDC are employees. Are we welcome there? Should we try? Now, when we went and dug into the details, what we found is that there were, with regards to the work permit, so there was a specific detail that was different for one individual that was allowed to go through versus the other. And so the lesson learned is companies really have to have their ducks in a row right now and be very attentive to the details proactively, because if you're not, unlike in the past where there might have been more leniency, and by the way, the nuance would not have triggered denying entry in the past, but it did today, so you really have to mind your P's and Q's. So that was a lesson learned. Another big thing that's happening right now, and this is what I get a lot of questions on. I was quoted in an interview in a national publication not too long ago, and it talks about the H-1 program. And there's a lot of concern around the administration basically saying we're going to make radical changes to the H-1B program because, and the intent, and so what the administration is saying is we do not want organizations abusing this program and hiring inexpensive labor, displacing U.S. workers, and increasing profit margins, which, I mean, that all makes sense to me. But what's lost is if you think about all the stuff that I've talked about, so what is the cost and expense of bringing somebody from literally across the globe to the U.S.? It costs a lot of money. We had an employee who wanted us to ship a wine collection. I think in U.S. dollars, that part of their household goods move would have cost us, I think it was to the tune of like $60,000. So it's a costly endeavor. And it's hard to get individuals and get them integrated, acclimated. It's harder, but it's important, it's good, and it's necessary, it works. But if I can find a software engineer in Coralville, I'm gonna do that, right? And so it's more costly to organizations. It's not cheaper, it's more expensive. It's more work. And so that's not what a lot of the tech companies are doing. The tech companies are trying to address the issue that we talked about earlier, which is the supply-demand disparity. And so while the current administration is focused on these organizations and this abuse, you've got a lot of executives. So Facebook, Google, Mark Zuckerberg has gone out. I mean, you can go and Google it, and said, like, I really think that given the opportunity to sit down and talk with policymakers, that this could potentially benefit organizations in high tech because they're going to recognize pretty quickly what the facts are. And so what we've told our employees is number one, calm down. There have not been changes yet to date. What may happen as a result of some of the changes is I hope that using the H-1 program in a way that it's displacing U.S. workers, that's not what we want, and there's a lot of controls in place to ensure that that doesn't happen. But when they realize what the facts are, it may actually make it easier for us. Companies like Amazon and Microsoft and IBM, Rockwell, Boeing, to leverage this program more easily. So we take a wait-and-see approach. Literally on a monthly basis, it seems like there is new news that we're trying to contend with and deal with. And so oftentimes your guess is as good as mine, but a lot of the fear and speculation has been strictly that. So for us, it's kind of been business as usual relative to our ability to go and how have we gone and leverage global talent, brought them into the organization. By and large, it hasn't really changed. Again, mind your P's and Q's, go and make decisions based on facts, not speculation, but definitely have an eye towards the news. Go in and partner with our external counsel is very important to us because it's their job, Fragaman, to go and as soon as news hits, they will call us, contact us, get in touch with us so we can have a conversation to say, here's what this now means for your business. So really important to stay plugged in, and it can change on a heartbeat. So very interesting times right now, certainly for Rockwell. But all in all, our business is booming, things are going well. We're hiring, we've got over 1,000 open jobs right now across the organization, and going and tapping into that global talent pool is as effective and as important today as it's ever been, and that's only going to continue.
What does Rockwell-Collins do to grow STEM grads in the United States?
So this is something very, very important to us. So Rockwell-Collins invests a tremendous amount of time and energy. In fact, we've got a portion of 2 different parts of the HR team and organization that this is solely what they're focused on. And so number one, there are a lot of programs and strategic partnerships. The most important one is FIRST. So FIRST is a program where the organization goes and donates over $1 million. Kelly Ortberg is one of their executive co-chairs. And if you've heard of or seen robotics competitions, FIRST Lego League, these are some of the programs. And so what they're trying to do is go and even in kindergarten all the way on up until an individual graduates from high school, go and get them engaged in activity that will increase their interest in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math. So it's literally with Legos, they're building like Lego robots. I was at the World Championships in St. Louis this last year. It then goes into small robots. So they literally build these robots and they have competitions into these monstrous robots. And it's a huge, huge event. So big, in fact, that one of the largest convention centers in St. Louis, it could no longer house the competition. So they had to have 2 different world finalist locations, one in Texas and then one in St. Louis. So Rockwell goes and identifies key opportunities and sponsors in summary to go and say, what can we do along with other organizations and companies in corporate America to try to expose individuals to activities and programming that's going to increase their interest. And the results have been fantastic. So there's a lot of data that suggests that what's coming out of those programs is individual. The results have been fantastic. They are moving into and obtaining STEM degrees and moving into STEM fields. So that's our approach.
There's a couple of questions dealing with the caps, and this one is, who sets the cap on the visas and why is it so low? And then also, who makes the decision on extending the visas and how are these decisions made? And does the U.S. government have anything to do with this?
So the very first one, I mean, it's the administration, and I'll just use that broadly. I couldn't pick a specific individual and say they're the decision maker, but ultimately the administration goes, I think, and takes a look at a lot of statistics and data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, and so what they do is try to take a look at a lot of information that relative to jobs, demand, census information, and then going and taking a look at and listening to lobbyists, individuals from corporate America saying this is what we need. And I think that they err on the side of being, again, very conservative relative to the number of visas new visas that they allow on an annual basis. Now, with regards to extensions, we have to file extensions. It is more a technicality, so you have to have the right form, the right data completed, but it's not very, very rarely, as long as you submit the extension at the appropriate time and filled out in the appropriate way. I guess it's kind of like FAFSA. If you don't fill it out right, you're not going to get your money. You'll get a notification that you didn't do it right. And it's kind of the same thing. So it's almost kind of like a pass-fail.
I'm going to put a couple more together. And one is, do you worry that foreign nationals will stop wanting to come to the U.S. as the global business landscape continues to change? And are you concerned that with foreign nationals, will they learn sensitive information and then jump to a competing firm in his or her country of origin? Look at this again.
Those are two good questions. So we do have two different groups. They're both in our Office of General Counsel that are very sensitive to proprietary data and sensitive personal data. So data privacy as a whole, proprietary data for the organization, that there is sensitivity to that. Now, there is always risk of an employee obtaining a wealth of knowledge. I know a lot about Rockwell, that I've acquired over the course of 9 years. And so can you go and take that and apply some of that knowledge legally elsewhere? Yeah, you can. And you've got that risk with virtually any job. What the organization cares more is a lot of our key or core critical intellectual property. And so there are restrictions from an import-export perspective where, especially if you think about some of the defense programs that we have that are very, very important, that's why the government places restrictions on having foreign national employees working on those programs to prohibit even the smallest ounce of risk. And so the other programs that anybody can work on, or the work that they're associated with, they can go and take it to other companies, but the impact from a national security perspective would be, there wouldn't be any impact. Let's see. So do you worry that foreign nationals will stop wanting to come to the U.S.? Towers Watson is a big consulting organization, and I was in Minneapolis a year and a half ago. There was an interesting comment that they made. The partner was very quick to say, again, speaking in generalities, but he was trying to coach and consult a lot of HR execs. And he said, one of the things that's interesting that you all need to think about is from in China as a whole, a lot of individuals that go and even seek degrees in the U.S., and there are, if you go and look at the information and data, quite a few students coming over from China, obtaining their degrees. Many of those individuals, their biggest desire is to go have that experience, get a great education, and take that back to them to their destination or origination location. India is very, very different. Many of the individuals that are coming here, what they're trying to do is obtain permanent residency. And so there's a big difference between, if you're, depending upon what strategically you're trying to accomplish, you may get different results. So as an example, one of the things that you may do is say, yeah, that's fine. If you want to, whether it's China, India, Russia, France, what have you, being more flexible, leveraging technology to allow them to do work, gain their education here, and then go back and work there. Increasingly, there's so much that can be done through virtual technology and collaborative tools to allow that to happen. That being said, one of the things that happened over the course of the last year was in Kansas, Rockwell, and this was on the news, I saw something about it even last week, an individual who was a former employee from Rockwell and unfortunately moved to Kansas and had a bit of craziness and unfortunately was killed. And let me tell you, that did have a big impact on our employees because they looked at that and said, that kind of craziness in the world, and I think a lot of the hate centered around that really caused them to stop and think and say, am I safe? More than anything else, safety, health, family, those things are important, I think, across cultures. And if those three things they can't count on, do they want to work in the United States for a company like Rockwell? So, and we're very, very empathetic, I think, as an organization. Garmin, who this individual worked for, I think felt the same exact way. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of stuff from a current events perspective that we need to think about very, very carefully as a country. And I don't want to get onto a political soapbox, but are we still the great opportunity that a lot of individuals thought about 10 years ago as they do today? And in certain cases, I think the answer, unfortunately, is no.
I want to get to a question from some of our students. There's several parts of it here. So what advice do you have for students or recent grads who are trying to work in the international field? And what does the future hold for domestic citizens striving to work internationally?
Do you mind if I grab the...
Okay. So I think the very first thing is, I think it can be difficult, not impossible, but difficult to go, and it's more challenging to go if you're in Cedar Rapids, you're about to go and get your degree, and you want to work in a specific country outside of the U.S., work for an organization there that's based there. I think it can be more challenging going and applying generically to those jobs and getting an offer versus if you go and talk to organizations, do your research, and see that there are companies that are global and international, and virtually all the big ones are nowadays. So if you go, and so Rockwell is a great example of that. You begin to have conversations with recruiters at Rockwell-Collins, and you say, you know what I'd really like to do is to start my career in Hong Kong or in the United Arab Emirates. I would love to. Do you have any opportunities in that part of the globe? I just got a call from our HR leader in Australia, and she's having a hard time filling a couple of engineering jobs. So if you interact with organizations that are global, you hook in here and you find out that they're receptive to providing those international assignments, whether they be long-term or on a permanent basis. So whether expat or on permanent relocation, going and doing that, I think, gives you the best possible chance. But increasingly, so we just launched actually on Monday, so our career site now encompasses all of our global jobs, and companies are doing that more and more. So what that does is it does make it easier for you to go directly onto Indeed, look and say, I want to be in Paris. Paris, finance, and boom, here's a bunch of jobs that are open and applying just like you would any job. So that's changing. So the technology, the job aggregators like Indeed are making that easier for you. What does the future hold for domestic citizens striving to work internationally? I think the future looks bright. I think that more and more companies are starting to figure out of necessity again. So we had it all buttoned up and figured out relative to how do our European locations work with our U.S. counterparts, and that worked very, very well. The IDC, the India Design Center, once I think there were some challenges that we had to smooth out, but boy, oh boy, I mean, more and more leaders here in the U.S. are sending work that way. It works so tremendously well. And so organizations are just figuring that out and getting very, very good, which if that's what you're seeking to do, I think that lends itself very well, because the trend is companies will get better and better at it, and that just creates more opportunity.
How do you handle the movement of talent from one language and cultural area to another differing area? Do you train internally or subcontract language cultural training?
So we have settling in services. We have cultural education. And so there's two things that we do. So we go and partner with external companies that this is their bread and butter. We don't have people in HR that are experts for every part of the globe. And even if we were to try to do that, 150 different countries and territories, and what we may have, if we were try to build up capability, the next thing you know, we're going to go and send somebody to a new region in the globe that we've never been in and operated in. That's kind of the norm. So we partner with organizations that this is what they do, and they're really, really good at it. So there's cultural training. Here's how you eat. Here's how you socialize, shake hands, what have you, gestures, language. And then there's settling in services in location as well. So even though we go and provide some training to employees, not all of that is going to stick. And so then they get there and maybe they've retained some and maybe they need a refresher or constant training. And so the settling in services help with that as well. And it's everything from culturally, here's how you behave and act, to like I need a local bank and I'm in Indonesia and the process isn't the same as it is in the US. What do I do? I want to buy a house or rent a property. What do I do? So there's all sorts of settling in things and details that need to get worked on just so that you can settle in.
Are there places in the U.S. where your foreign engineers or their families have been poorly treated? And if so, how does Rockwell-Collins deal with this?
So we have a lot of ways that we can go and obtain input from our employees. So as an example, we have a global employee survey. It's anonymous, so that wouldn't necessarily work, but listening sessions, literally we call it the "we're listening" button. All sorts of ways that employees can go and interact with leadership in small groups or individually where it's very safe for them to provide feedback without fear of retaliation. So in a situation like the listening button, it can be anonymous if you want. Most people provide their information, and they'd be able to provide us that type of feedback. And what I can share is we do not get, I can't think of a single comment like that. Maybe it's that we're Midwest nice in Cedar Rapids, but even our other locations, I really think that you look across the aisle. I'm doing software engineering, and whether it's somebody who's a new grad, so they're less experienced than me, or we've hired a female engineer, so the gender is different, or they're from India, so the location and nation of origin or their ethnicity is different. You're just happy that you've got a team member that's a strong team member that's working towards a common purpose and goal to do great work to make Rockwell the best it can be. So that's what we see. We take a lot of pride in that, and I'd say that's the more prevailing. It makes me feel good. Those are the types of people, that's the values of our organization, and you really see that. I see more of the, I would say the opposite. You see individuals that are working really hard to help people, number one, honor and respect, be interested in their culture, but welcome with open arms also those individuals. So I would say it's actually probably overwhelmingly the opposite.
Unfortunately, there are many good questions, but not enough time. So at this point, I'm going to have to conclude our program, and I want to give a big thanks once again to Steve Schulz for his presentation. I also want to thank our sponsors, the University of Iowa's International Programs, the University of Iowa's Honors Program, the University of Iowa Center for Public Policy, and the Stanley U of I Foundation Support Organization for their generous support. And we also thank today's special sponsors, Jim and Pat Epgrave, and Taxes Plus. And we thank City Channel 4 for making our programs available to viewing audience. And Steve, as a small token of our appreciation, I present you with the highly coveted Iowa City Foreign Relations Council mug. So thank you very much. Thank you. Great.